afternoon. If you can grab a seat, we'd like to get started this afternoon. We want to kind of stay on schedule. My name is Ian Vickers. I'm the President and CEO of Global Partners in Hope, but more importantly, I'm a proud member of this committee or this group, and I'm proud to be here with you. I've been a part of the steering committee for quite a while, and I'm glad to be in a room with people who have a mutual care for what happens across the globe. So whether you're here breaking bread together, having a meal, or you are attending virtually across the country, we're glad that you're here and you're glad you're joining us. The good news is that we are going to hear some wonderful topics today. We know that we are globally interconnected. We have learned that over the last several years, intertwined, and that makes us very keenly aware of global issues and the importance of global issues. And we know that it's an issue that is dear to all of us. It's not a Republican issue, not a Democratic issue, but it's an issue that affects us as Americans. And so we talk about it. We talk about global issues when we're sitting at a table in our homes with our family or in a restaurant with friends. And so I'm glad to have you here and glad to have this conversation. This is a special community of people that are gathered here, and not just from Nebraska, but from across the country. And so we have people who are from big towns, from small towns, from rural towns, from urban towns here, and who are participating. And we are leaders in business. We are humanitarians. We are people who are public servants. We are veterans who are gathered here. And we have diverse backgrounds, but we have a common ground. And that common ground is that we know that America plays an important role, and that's important. And we know that when America shows up, good things happen. And so I'm glad to be here with you. I know that from my own personal experience, like global health is a big issue for us. It's part of our organization. You realize that 80% of the world does not have access to the kind of health care that we have. I know that personally, going into parts of West Africa where you can't even get a bottle of ibuprofen. And so let that sink in a little bit. And so we at Global Partners in Hope collaborate. Part of our objective is to collaborate with local leaders there in that part of the world. And we develop clean water wells, health centers that focus on maternal and pediatric care. And it's all run by renewable energy. And we have been able to see over the last 20 years the improvement of the lives of women and children, hundreds and thousands of lives. In fact, we have a group of Nebraskans that are heading in a couple weeks, surgeons locally, who are going to help build out a surgical unit in part of West Africa. So we know that we can do all of that because of people like you, people who are from Nebraska and from the Heartland and from Iowa, who step up to the plate, who are aware of these issues, who are concerned about saving lives, alleviating suffering, and creating global stability, developing and creating diplomacy, and improving the lives of people across the globe. It showcased some of our best values as a nation. There are many stories that we're going to hear today. And so it's exciting to be here. It's exciting to be able to dive into those stories and hear them. And so buckle up, like drinking out of a fire hydrant over the next 45 minutes. And I have the privilege of introducing to you Eric Moher, who is the director of the Heartland U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. So Eric, let's welcome him here this morning.
Thank you, Ian, for kicking off our annual Heartland Summit. And to everyone here, welcome. While we've got a great crowd in Omaha today, I know we're joined by over 50,000 people online from across the Heartland. I would especially like to thank the people and organizations who made today's event possible, including Cargill, USGLC's Heartland Chair, our amazing Nebraska Advisory Committee members, all of our local partners, and of course, our incredible special guest, who you'll hear from shortly. I invite everyone to join the conversation on social media and use the hashtag Heartland Summit 24 to chime in. First, a little about USGLC and why we're so glad you've chosen to spend your afternoon with us. At USGLC, we bring together a diverse network of leaders from all 50 states, including 12 states from the American Heartland. We are joined by over 500 American businesses, humanitarian organizations, military veterans, faith-based leaders, and foreign policy luminaries who all come together around the importance of our civilian tools of national power, development, and diplomacy. Our coalition represents a rich spectrum of backgrounds and experiences, from our Next Gen Global Leaders program to our Farmers for Prosperity network of agribusiness leaders committed to harnessing all American resources to feed the world. Our network spans from coast to coast and throughout the country, from Maine to Arizona, Washington to Florida, to right here in Nebraska and everywhere in between. And what brings us all together is our shared belief in America's global leadership. We believe that strategic investments in diplomacy and development are essential to protecting our national security, advancing our economic interest, and projecting the very best of American values. It's why we talk about how this tiny 1% of the federal budget, called the International Affairs Budget, is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments America makes. It's also why we talk about why leading globally matters locally. We ask a simple question: what's it worth? What's it worth for America to be engaged in the world? What's it worth to invest in diplomacy, global development, and foreign assistance? What's it worth to our security, our health, and our local economies? We have heard powerful stories from across the Heartland. Business leaders have answered, it means more customers here at home. Veterans tell us that it keeps our service members out of harm's way. And farmers say it means more global markets for our crops. And we are proud to bring these stories and conversations across the state, because engagement in the world has a direct impact on our kitchen table issues. So now let's hear from you. What is American global leadership worth to you? Follow the instructions on the screen and tell us what it's worth to you. The words you type in will appear on the screen. So now let's see what you're all saying. All right, we have prosperity, we have building trade networks, we have everything, democracy, and protecting our security. And this is going to be our focus today, to talk about the connectivity of our values, our security, our democracy, and our economy. Thank you all for being a part of our journey to build a better and safer world. And with that, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Cindy Allen, Nebraska's Deputy Secretary of State, to the stage.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Allen, Nebraska's Deputy Secretary of State for International Trade. I work at the pleasure of the Secretary of State, Bob Evenden, who is the Chief Protocol Officer for the state of Nebraska in the area of education, commerce, and culture. In other words, he represents the state of Nebraska to the world, much like the ambassador or the Secretary of State of the United States. The stakes for U.S. global leadership are higher than ever. With growing number of international crises and humanitarian conflicts raging around the world, it's clear that leading globally means locally. And that leading locally, we do it in the America Heartland, can have a global impact. The U.S. has delivered military aid to national security, investing in diplomacy and development to fight corruption and promote the rule of law, as well as investing in humanitarian and economic assistance to improve the world. American organizations, public and private, receive aid to combat hunger, malnourishment, disease, and poverty. These organizations provide a safety net in countries where a safety net does not exist. Recipients of U.S. aid, such as USAID, in addition to NGOs such as the World Food Program, ACDI-VOCA, Save the Children, or PVOs, which are private volunteer organizations such as Catholic Charities, World Vision, Rotary International, and some of those that you see in our hallways on display, are working harder than ever to deliver humanitarian assistance to people in countries that have suffered shocks. And what do I mean by shocks? One such shock is a climate shock, a country that has experienced drought or floods or plagues that leave people malnourished and suffering from diseases, such as when we experienced COVID-19. Now we have monkeypox, we had Ebola spread across eastern Africa. All of these have an economic impact, especially on women, children, and the extremely poor in the rural areas. In Kenya, they had a drought, the most serious drought that they have experienced in 40 years. Because of this drought, over 150,000 livestock died of starvation. And to multiply that, locusts, as a result of the drought, swarmed and ate the crops that were no longer viable and all the vegetation across Ethiopia and Kenya. This affects the people who are in refugee camps in northern Kenya as well, because it lacks food and water because of the extreme drought that occurred. There's other shocks, such as conflicts because of corrupt governments that create economic conditions that cause people to migrate into refugee camps and flood neighboring countries. And we have experienced this in our own country, but also in Europe and across Africa, from people migrating out of Sudan or migrating into the largest refugee camp that is located in Bangladesh. There's over 900,000 people in the refugee camp in Bangladesh who are in need of food, water, education. USGLC advocates for increase in our foreign aid budget to enhance national security and economic and humanitarian assistance through political lobbying. Foreign aid is only 1% of the total budget. Through strategic investments in these programs, Nebraska has a seat at the table. Nebraska delivers food aid. In Crete, Nebraska, the co-op in Crete, Nebraska produces corn-soy blends for USAID that are sent around the world and into refugee camps. In fact, I saw the same corn-soy blend in a hospital in Bangladesh when I served with a medical team to deliver cleft lip and cleft palate surgery to children. They also deliver assistance through the World Food Program that in Nebraska and in western Nebraska, we're the largest producers of Great Northern beans. And through the World Food Program, we were able to send Great Northern beans to Yemen, where over 1 million people are starving. Through UNMC, we have a quarantine facility that was the first facility to house patients that had contracted Ebola from Africa, and also were very instrumental in quarantine during COVID-19. We deliver medical supplies and assistance, education, and research. The University of Nebraska has collaborated with many global education institutes. In the next couple of weeks, they will be signing MOUs with universities from Jordan, as well as universities from Kenya, to collaborate in research in agriculture and precision agriculture, to teach and to assist these countries to grow their own food. But in addition to that, foreign aid creates jobs at home, as I've just explained. It opens future markets. When we deliver food into countries that are stressed and have suffered shocks, we open our markets for the future from food that's delivered from our state of Nebraska and actually from all of the Heartland states that were represented earlier. It opens up our economy, it opens up jobs, but it also develops alliances and diplomacy and diplomatic connections between the Heartland and other countries around the world. So here in Nebraska, we're especially privileged to be represented by Congressman Bacon, who not only understands everything that I just said, but is really a true champion for it. At this point, Kim Reynolds and Ann O'Reilly, merchandising manager for Cargill, USGLC's Heartland Chair. For our second conversation on national security, we will be joined by Lieutenant General Richard Newton of the U.S. Air Force, and we welcome USGLC's National Outreach Director, Alex Grant, who will be moderating both of these conversations. But it is also my honor to introduce our featured guest, Congressman Don Bacon. Everything is better with bacon on it. Congressman Bacon represents Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District since 2017 and is still growing strong. Throughout his tenure, Congressman Bacon has been a strong supporter of the international affairs budget, working across the aisle to advance America's global leadership. This Congress, he sits on the Armed Service and Agriculture Committees and serves as a co-chair of the Baltic Security Caucus. His commitment to serving the nation, however, long predates his service as representative of Nebraska's 2nd District, and prior to his election, Congressman Bacon served nearly 30 years in the United States Air Force, retiring as Brigadier General. Congressman, we're grateful to have you joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can leverage our civilian national security tools of development and diplomacy to improve and make a better world.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate it. The lights are bright. It's like my POW training.
Now I want bacon on the salad. I'm a little upset that we don't have that. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our panel. We're excited for today's conversation. As Ian said, we are turning on the fire hose very quickly here. So we're going to jump right in, talk about global crises and food security, just a really light topic for today's afternoon. But we are seeing on the news constantly global crises like the war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East are exposing the vulnerabilities of the food supply chain worldwide. But they've also shown us how important American farmers and producers are in the face of rapidly evolving global threats. So I'm going to be coming to each of you. Congressman, you're on the hot seat first, to talk about the topic a little bit, topic for a moment here. So from your perspective as a member of Congress, what have these crises really revealed to you about the importance of American leadership on the global stage, both from the importance of America's diplomatic and development toolkit, and from the impact on American farmers and producers? So take it away, Congressman.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming to Omaha. We're so blessed to have all of you here. And I know we got some DC folks, Iowa folks, but welcome. It's a real honor to share the stage with these folks here. The United States is the indispensable power. We're the voice for freedom and the values that we hold dear, whether it's freedom, whether it's individual rights and respect of just humanity. We represent that, and we got to have America's voice out there. So I'm going to just lead off with that up front. We can't become an isolationist country. We're having some growing strands in our political dialogue, wanting us to pull back and just worry about us. When we do that, the world becomes more dangerous, and it eventually comes to our shores. We're a global world now. You just can't hide from troubles. When it comes to ag, and your question was more directed towards ag, we are the breadbasket of the world. We would like to feed the world. Our farmers would love to do that. But what we've seen, like with Ukraine, a lot of Ukraine's also a big wheat producer. And so when that war started, that created ripple effects throughout, particularly in the Levant, Northern Africa. So it's all interconnected. And so our farmers were glad to try to help fill that in, but the war in Ukraine did impact all of that. Further, we're very reliant on fertilizers and herbicides from Russia and China. And when we have sanctions, all of that creates a ripple effect for the farmer. So, but without us, the world's a much more dangerous place, whether it's on the ag side or the national security side. And we can't crawl behind the wall. We got to be out front, working with our allies and creating a more stable world.
Yep, absolutely. So, Taryn has done just about everything. It seems like when I look through this, you've worked at the State Department, the UN, you're now Chief of Staff to Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa. You have this unique state-level, national, international perspective on food security and its connection to global crises. So help us connect the dots here economically. Can you draw out that link between issues that matter in the heartland, like in Iowa or right here in Nebraska, and what's going on globally when it comes to the matters of food security, and why is that vital for Americans here in the heartland to ensure that U.S. is in keeping the globe secure?
Yeah, it's funny, when I was, as you indicated, serving at the State Department in the Trump administration, and decided I'm from Iowa originally, a small town in Crawford County in western Iowa, so grew up a Nebraska fan. But when we decided, we'd been out in DC for about 10 years and decided to come home to work for Governor Reynolds, I expected that I would be kind of trading in, my background in foreign policy for work on, tax policy and education and workforce, and, to some extent that's certainly true. But I have been personally just, honestly surprised at how often my background in foreign policy is relevant to my current job. How engaged that governors, and particularly heartland governors, are in foreign policy, because as the congressman indicated, our farmers and producers and ag manufacturers are probably more engaged in global politics than almost anyone. They follow it extraordinarily closely. In Iowa, last year we exported $16.5 billion in ag exports, second to only the state of California.
Number 3.
Number 2. We're number 1 in pork and corn, and no, I'm just. So it's obviously it's critical. Our entire state budget is $10 billion. So that just tells you the importance. And so a couple things I've seen since I started working for Governor Reynolds about 3.5 years ago. We have a lot of delegations from around the world that come, and it's not just the Consul General in Chicago, which is important, but we get heads of state that want to meet with the governor. We go on a trade mission, as I know Governor Pillen does as well, but every year, and bring our commodity groups and particularly in the ag space. Another trend I have seen, I'm sure many of you have as well, and this isn't intended to be a political point, just an observation. The Biden administration really hasn't prioritized free trade agreements over the last several years, and so we've increasingly seen our partners and allies around the world coming to states and governors directly, attempting to work on purchase agreements or just MOUs. Obviously, states can't set tariff policies or anything like that, but we've seen a lot of interest and engagement, particularly in Midwestern agriculture states. So yeah, I certainly have kind of lived it and see it every day, the importance to the heartland that foreign policy is.
Yeah, that subnational diplomacy is really becoming a really critical part. Even mayors, even USGLC just signed a partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors because there's so much subnational diplomacy work happening around the country. And I want to bring you to the conversation here because one of the reasons I was excited about the panel, because we have so many different perspectives. And Ann here grew up on a grain and livestock operation in southern Minnesota, has worked for Cargill for, I heard you say earlier, almost 30 years now. You performed so many roles at the company within the agriculture supply chain business. From the American business perspective, how does fighting hunger around the world really help create American stability here at home? And why is this work so critical to our neighbors here in the Heartland?
Well, the one thing I would have to say, from a Cargill perspective, we operate in 7 different countries across the globe, and our mission statement is heavily weighted to nourishing people. And one of the things that we firmly believe in, a crisis in one region can impact the entire food system, and our fates are interconnected. I mean, we see what happened when we had the invasion in Ukraine, and globally prices move pretty volatilely, especially in the grain complex. And I mean, we're now coming off of that high-priced grain volume or prices that we had, and as volumes worldwide are increasing a little bit. But when you look at the interconnected nature of our food system, one major incident in a specific region will always significantly have a ripple effect in trade patterns, production, consumption, and ultimately food security. And over time, the markets themselves will ease that disparity, because the market always works in terms of moving areas that have a deficit from supplies coming into that area. So it will work, but it takes time. But in the meanwhile, there can be a lot of economic disadvantages to those areas that suffer from that. But worst of all, it's the human impact and the cost to farmers and consumers can be very, very substantial. As an employee of Cargill and our company, we are also doing all we can to ensure that the safety of our teams, the continuity of our operations, and the success of not only Ukrainian farmers, but farmers down in Africa, Europe, and South America, and in the US are all sustainable and able to produce economic livelihood for the communities that they operate in.
So well, thank you all three for that. We touched on economic security just there, and Congressman, I want to come to you because you've argued that our national security and our agricultural industry are linked. Given that Nebraska ranks 3rd in food production among states, and that sports soon to be 2, $10 billion per year in agricultural export products, there are very few states where the link between economic security and agriculture is more evident. So can you walk us through your vision of how that connection plays out in Nebraska, and how do agricultural producers in Nebraska not only strengthen our economy, but also bolster our national security element there?
Like 1 out of every 3 jobs in Nebraska are tied to agriculture. So it's, and even in Omaha, a lot of people in Omaha don't realize how reliant we are in agriculture here. I mean, we sell 85% of the world's pivot irrigation right here. A couple of our plants produce it all. You go to Europe and you're going to see Valmont or Lindsay irrigation, and that's just one example. We have ConAgra. My son works there. We're all interconnected to the ag here, and as you say, we're the 3rd largest export state, right with Iowa, and we're the breadbasket right here. We could do so much more. One of the things that's concerning from my vantage point is in the last 4 years, there's been very little discussion about trade. And even previous to that, we had the ability for multilateral trade. And I thought it would work. We should be there at the table in Asia and Europe building these trade deals. The one in Asia was designed to try to keep China out and build in an inside game for us so we could have the advantages working with our allies, and we pulled out of that. I think it was a mistake in hindsight. But we are so dependent on getting our products out to Asia, Europe, you name it, and we have that ability. And it's funny, I was talking to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, it was Boris Johnson, and he goes, "Don, we want a free trade deal with you, except for agriculture." I go, "It don't work that way." That's our competitive advantage, right? We got to have that. But let me maybe dig a little deeper. I think in our country, built on a free market system that works, this free market system's developed the greatest economy in history. It's elevated more people out of poverty ever, right here. But we have a couple of good aces in our hand. One of it is we are agriculturally independent. We can feed ourselves. Not a lot of countries can do that. And we can feed 2 or 3 times our number, given the opportunity. We were so efficient and good at it. We could do the same thing with our energy independence as well. We could do so much more there and help Europe get weaned off of Russian energy. But these are, to me, the inner strategy of trying to keep our country the strongest in the world and most economically viable. But clearly, if our ag capacity makes us a superpower.
And so as we look at that capacity, we talk about the private sector engagement here, and so I want to come back to you in here. And to talk about Cargill, because Cargill is one of hundreds of American companies that are both large and small who are part of the USGLC's network. Globally engaged companies like Cargill, you understand why it's so important for farmers and producers to be focused on global food security. So as entities, leaders across the region, and in this time of real, strong global threats that we're facing, what role does Cargill play in supporting the agricultural communities right here in the Heartland?
Yeah, I can speak to that pretty well. My boss who works in Minneapolis tells me, and it struck me that he said, well, you have the biggest checkbook. I work for the corn milling processing plant at Blair, Nebraska. And every year, my team and I, we originate 120 million bushels of corn that literally comes from an 8 to 9 county area in eastern Nebraska, western Iowa. And that's over 2,000 different farmer customers, growers that we work with. And so our 4,200 employees in Cargill that are in the state of Nebraska alone, they work across 5 different business groups, and every single one of those business groups is tied to either procuring a raw commodity and transforming it into food for either humans and or livestock consumptions. And so working across those different, and then 12 different locations is what we represent in the state of Nebraska as well. But for 159 years, Cargill has been mission-driven to connect farmers to markets. And we started out with a small little elevator in Iowa, and when I think of the size of our, not only our domestic consumed bushels for feed and for fuel, but also the export capacity we have globally, it stands that helps ensuring that the livelihoods and the prosperity of ag communities all across the U.S. Continue to be dependent and thrive. And our unique position at the heart of the food system and global supply chain provides distinct values to farmers. My team works every single day, as do a lot of other Cargill merchants and traders, in helping farmers make marketing decisions and using the tools to help protect prices. Not only that, we also invest heavily in talking with farmers around sustainability and regenerative agriculture. But we believe in the community's ability to make food for good and to nourish people in Nebraska and grow its economy while helping achieve global target objectives. We've also contributed and will continue to contribute heavily into our local communities through education, food security, developing the younger generations for future production, and $68 million is what we invested in the last year. We will continue to do that because we believe in America's grassroots growth of our young employees, and our communities are very strong to the community.
Well, thank you, Ann. And so our next question here, before we go to that, I want to give you all a heads up. We're going to be coming to the audience for Q&A following this question, so get your minds going. Make sure you have some questions. We'll have our folks walking around with mics. But this next question is for Taryn and for the congressman here. And it's really looking at investing into the future of food security, because these solutions to reducing global hunger can really be found at a lot of universities right here in the United States, and we have a few that are represented here in our audience here today. Last year, U.S. Agency for International Development selected the University of Nebraska to lead a new $19 million Feed the Future innovation lab. This year, researchers at Iowa State University have been focusing on reducing food infections, in Africa as part of the project by the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for genomics and to improve poultry. What they haven't done is improve the length of which these titles are. Feed the Future investments are led by American universities. They bring major returns to the U.S. farmers and consumers. strengthen farmer resilience to shocks, and enable countries around the world to better respond to crises. So, Taryn, we'll have you answer first. We'll come to the Congressman next. How do these kinds of partnerships really accelerate solutions, help strengthen the Heartland's role in solving the complex global food security challenges? Taryn.
Yeah, I mean, innovation obviously is critical to agriculture. You know, we're always trying to do more with less. And as the Congressman said, you know, we've done a pretty good job at that. But we can always do better. We can always do more. And we're always trying to contend with, you know, now we have bird flu in dairy cows. You know, I mean, it's just always, I'm sure the ag folks in the room, it's always something that we're trying to get ahead of. So, I mean, I don't know if there's folks from Iowa State here, but in Iowa, you know, our land-grant university is, you know, we have a lot of pride in Iowa that Norman Borlaug obviously was from Iowa and, you know, did a lot of work at university and is kind of credited with saving, you know, 1 billion people from starvation. And George Washington Carver, a connection to Iowa State as well. And so, I mean, those are some really prominent examples of you know, the difference that folks connected to universities, often with a public-private partnership. You know, we have, Iowa State has a major research park where they do a lot of work. The state of Iowa recently invested millions of dollars in a vet diagnostic lab. And so, I mean, those, we certainly know well, as do all of our farmers, the importance of improvements in technology for agriculture. I think, you know, a lot of people around the world don't know, and frankly around the United States don't understand how tech-focused agriculture is today. And so that's one thing when you know, Governor Reynolds is doing events around the country, she always likes to talk about. Because it's really amazing how agriculture has really embraced technology and science. It's a science-based field, and we've made obviously a lot of really great strides over the last century. But certainly, I know, you know, more to come.
Absolutely, Congressman.
We've done incredible things with research. Just think, 100 years ago, we had 35 bushels an acre for corn. What is it today? 6 times that, roughly. And I bet you 100 years ago, they had no idea. You just assume this is reality. 35 bushel an acre, but the gains that we have made to do 6-fold increase in production allows us to feed 330 million people, Americans, and much beyond that. I was at a facility with the new sprayers. Actually, they brought them out to Washington, D.C. on the mall. And so they have sprayers out there. I just don't remember where I saw this at. So the sprayers used to be, I mean, I was a farm kid till I was 21, and I joined the Air Force in 1985, but I farmed from 13 years old on the farm, and I would do the sprayer. You just turn it on the whole time, and you go up and down the field, you spray everything, right? Now you have sensors. That's corn, that's a weed. And you get about 20, you only burn about 20% of what you did, because it only sprays where there's a weed. We're gonna get to the point where they're gonna identify the weed, and then you can come up with a better spray. That's the future. So I just think about that. I think it's an incredible, let's look at irrigation. Used to be, I mean, I had one big pivot on our farm growing up. You just turn it on and it goes, right? Now you have the sensors, okay, that part of the field needs 2 inches, this side of the field needs 1. And it used to be, it would take you, on a bigger farms, 2 hours to turn them all off when you wanted to turn them off, or 2 hours to turn them on. Now you go, right? All the water you save. I can just go on and on. Let me give you one other example. Foot and mouth disease. We have a vaccine for it. And I was able to get, my first legislation passed out of Congress was to stand up a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank in America. We had one in France, but it doesn't work too well for us. When you have an outbreak here, yeah, we needed that capability right here. And we've got to do the same thing eventually here with the swine fever. The whole Chinese pork industry got devastated. We don't want that to happen here. So we're really working hard to do research to counter swine fever, because it will wipe us out if it gets in our shores. But when it comes to the land-grant universities like University of Nebraska, there's so much great research going on. I know it's going on in Iowa too, with what I was reading, whether it's on the livestock side or the grain side, and it's very impressive. The partnership that we have at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, is, some degree is Kearney as well. A lot of great work going on. We've got some future research facilities that we're going to be putting in at Lincoln, and it's a win-win. You know, our universities benefit, and our farmers and ranchers also benefit. I would like to also point out, if I may, in University of Nebraska Omaha and at UNMC, both those universities are partnering with DoD at levels you would not believe. We have Cyber Center, Counterterrorism Center. We're learning how to transport people with very contagious diseases, and they're teaching the military how to do it. This is going on at UNMC. UNMC is becoming the hub for biodefense, contagions, biowar, and so it's just impressive. University of Nebraska-Lincoln will be, I think, the center soon for how to defend our food chain from bioattack. Imagine if somebody comes here with, African swine fever and drops it in Nebraska. It would be devastating. So we got to learn how to fight that, and we have future plans to build that research at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So it's a great partnership. One other thing that I did not know about until I retired 10 years ago and I got involved in this, we have experts from the university in every county advising farmers and ranchers how they can have the latest technology, the latest techniques. What a win-win relationship. I mean, I am so impressed with the partnership that we have in the rural community with our universities. It's a win-win.
Well, let's see, look out into the audience. It's really hard to see with the light. So raise your hand if you have any questions. I see Sarah and Emily are walking around.
While we're looking.
Oh, I know that y'all aren't that shy. Oh, there we go, right there. Sarah, it's right behind you, sir. Yeah.
I appreciate all the great folks in this room. As I look around.
We use the word food, what was I'm trying to look for? Insecurities. Up till COVID, we really never heard of that. And I figured when COVID went away, food insecurity would go away too, but that's still here. What do you contribute that to?
That's a great question. And by the way, one of our leaders in Saunders County, I appreciate you being here, on the one of our county supervisors right there. When we went through COVID, we really plussed up SNAP. We plussed up food banks. We had a huge unemployment, obviously, for a while there, but we had to counter with government programs. But when we come out of COVID, our unemployment, American, is 2.2% poorer today than they were 3 years ago. Now, 2.2% doesn't sound like maybe a lot, but it is when you're earning 30 or 40,000 and you got a family of 4. So utilities are up, food is up, and so people are having to make hard choices there. So what we have found, even with the record employment numbers, we're having just as much demand on food banks. I volunteer at food banks, and you got 3 or 4 blocks of cars lined up out there, and it's an anomaly because you got a record low unemployment. But it's to me, it's primarily all about inflation outpacing wage increases. Now, thankfully, right now it's stabilized, but it doesn't make up for 3 years of loss. Right now it's stabilized. That means we're not going farther back, but we're not going forward or eating back those 3 years of loss, and I think that's what it is.
And as you look at it globally, what roles, Ukraine, climate, some of these other areas, it would welcome any comments from anyone here on what that has an impact on food insecurity as well.
Well, Ukraine produces 10% of the wheat in the world, so when that was shut off, obviously commodities went up, which makes it harder to afford. So Ukraine was part of the inflation issue, but I wouldn't say it's the only thing. It was a piece of it.
Yeah. It's been a domino effect over the years, for sure.
But I yield to others here.
I would just say, and I guess it's a little bit tenuous, but our manufacturers have been, and even our commodity groups that rely on fertilizer, there's a supply chain is really just starting to move again, and so we had a lot of buildup or a lot of backlog from the supply chain issues that occurred, in part due to COVID, but impacted by unrest and the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well.
If I could add one more thing.
Sure.
1 out of 8 enlisted people in the military have to get SNAP or go to food banks. So I brought that to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I said, hey, I think this is something we should make a priority. And he looked at me like, he didn't give me feedback right away, so okay, I guess it didn't register. So then the next day, he spoke to 222 Republicans, the whole conference. He goes, my number one priority if I'm chairman is we're gonna get military guys off SNAP, and Don Bacon's in charge. So I worked the whole year analyzing this, but it gets to the point where food insecurity was affecting our military. And our pay raises for the military, particularly in the junior enlisted, we're not keeping up with the need. And so we're proposing this year a 19% wage increase for E1 through E4. That gets them above that threshold. And I got that passed out of the House, initiative that I chaired. We just got to get it through the Senate. That's a whole other issue.
Well, I don't see any other questions right now. You have another chance. Oh, we have one more. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Greg Fred, founder and CEO of Whispering Roots. We are a nonprofit based out of Omaha, Nebraska. And for the gentleman that was asking that last question, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. We run food aggregation and distribution in the Omaha area for folks who can't get fed by the food banks and things of that nature. There's a long conversation about what's going on with our broken supply chain. And in a previous life, I was a military logistics officer as well. And I know Don Bacon, we used to live in the same area. But that is a serious, serious issue in terms of feeding. The problem of hunger was here before COVID hit. It only made it worse and only put a spotlight on it. And we are seriously struggling to feed the folks who are in need right now, which is very sad in a country that has the ability to feed the world. So I spent a lot of time looking at that. Our presentation outside is actually focused on the work that we do in Haiti. And then we do work in Africa and Madagascar and places like that as well. I see food as a national security issue. We see people who come from these countries, they come here to learn from us. We do small scale work because they can't handle the technology yet. But the people that we see, if we can teach them our techniques, that makes us all safer. I had a gentleman from Africa in my car a couple weeks ago.
Sir, really appreciate it. Do you have a question for the panel
Yeah,
here? So I want to make sure that we stay on time.
Sorry about that.
Really want to make sure everyone goes and visits your table after this.
My question was this. We have the technology and we have the ability to grow. How can we take some of this work that we're doing in the United States with our capacity, and how can we convey that better to some of these countries that are in need so that we don't end up fighting them in the future?
Great. Thank you so much. Congressman, who wants to take that?
Typically, there's a debate, do you send American food to places like Haiti or some countries like Sudan, or do you write them a check and have them do it? Typically, we prefer to send our products over there if we can, but it doesn't always work because sometimes you just got to write a check. But I prefer sending American products because it helps us out. It becomes a win-win. But you offer a third solution, teaching them how to fish, right? And I think that we have, USAID and other nonprofits out there are in that business. I think it's really important that should be one of the wheels that we ride on to solve this problem. It's giving them the expertise and the advice how to do their agriculture better. I totally agree with you. So I don't think we're doing that adequately enough. I'm not an expert on this part, but surely it should be one of the tools that we have in the toolkit.
I think one of the things that Mark Green, former minister of USAID, always said about the goal of foreign aid is to not need a country to have foreign aid. Horrible summation of what he said exactly. He did it much better than I did, but I think that is the general feeling here of just we don't want countries to continue to have to rely on the United States.
Great point.
So I want to close out the rest of this panel. We're going to have an opportunity later to come back for more questions from the audience here. I want to talk a little bit about bipartisanship. And you and your colleague, who unfortunately was unable to make it here today, stuck in Chicago, it may seem, Congressman Carbajal, you've become a little famous on Capitol Hill for your continued friendship and your cooperation in the face of increasing divisions between Republicans and Democrats in Congress. And I welcome thoughts from the entire panel here just on the idea of bipartisanship as we go through. And Congressman, you're a co-founder of the Four Country Caucus. How important is bipartisan consensus on American global leadership, specifically our ability to address the global crises from violent conflict to humanitarian challenges like hunger? Why is bipartisanship so important to you as a member of Congress?
James Madison designed a system of government that requires consensus to do anything. That's why we have a bicameral, 3 branches of government. We're not a parliament. If you're a parliament and you have the majority, you can do what you want on foreign policy or working with Russia, China, Iran. But American governance demands consensus building. That's why bipartisanship is so important, particularly for America versus maybe countries that have a parliament. Because if you can't get a consensus, you're just idle in the water, and you're not making a left or right, you're just drifting, and it doesn't work. 10, 20 years ago, you would see the most liberal Republican be to the left of the most conservative Democrats. You had this little overlap. Today, there's literally no overlap. The most moderate Republican, and I won't say his name, I like picking on him, I always call him my favorite Democrat, but and the most conservative Democrat are apart. And that's unheard of in our history. We always have had overlap. And part of it's because we have, super redistricted districts that are heavily Republican, heavily Democrat. We're to the point today where there's only about 20 to 30 seats that can ever flip. There's only 2 districts that have an RPI of 0. We're one of them. Normally have I was an R4 when we started, but should lean Republican by 4. We have R20, and the rest of Nebraska, it's R20 to R30, right? But here it's a 0, it's a totally down the middle split. But because we have such bright blue and bright red, it is becoming harder and harder to find this. And when it comes to the Agriculture Committee, it used to be one of the most bipartisan committees in the House when I started. Unfortunately, it has fallen into a partisan war a lot of times, and it's not necessary. We only disagree really on SNAP and trade, but production agriculture, there's a lot of agreement. But this last 4 years has not been good in the Ag Committee for working together, unfortunately. So my journey on this, in 2017, my first year, the House passed records amount of legislation, and we're all patting each other on the back, high five, I'm doing great. Very little of it got out of the Senate. So I made an observation my first year, like, I need to become part of bipartisan groups, because even if you have a majority in the House and the Senate and a president, you still can't get 60 votes in the Senate. So we got to start working together to hit singles and doubles, quit going for the grand slams all the time, because it's very hard to get. So I became part of the problem solvers. I stood up the 4-country caucus of veterans. They're half Republican, half Democrat. And the whole goal here is to find areas that we can get 70 or 80% agreement and move the ball down the field. And if we don't do that, our country doesn't solve the border. It's hard to coalesce around Ukraine. It's hard to coalesce around trade deals. Even trade's become partisan, and we need it. And so our system of government requires this.
I welcome any thoughts from either of our other panelists here just on general bipartisanship, or we can pass this on and move to the next question if you like. I defer to you as well, but certainly would just, say that from a governor's perspective, governor is actually, from a states' rights perspective, there's actually, there's commonality from time to time on issues that states in particular feel strongly about. There's a lot of collaboration on issues around, most recently, we were just talking about it at the table. In Iowa, we had 3 federal disaster declarations in 2 months between April and June. And, that obviously, in South Dakota and Nebraska, we have Republican governors, but in other, in other parts of, down our rivers, we've got some Democratic governors. And so we've worked with, Kansas and Missouri, Nebraska and Iowa on our levee system, and obviously the Biden administration. We've worked very closely with FEMA in the last few months. So certainly, I think there's still, folks work together. To your point, people do rise to the occasion in dealing with really serious issues, and I've seen it firsthand. But certainly, different than DC, which glad to be in the Midwest now. Well, thank you, and thank you, Taryn, for joining our panel, this first part of the panel today. And give a round of applause to both of them for joining. And we will welcome General Newton to the stage. We're going to stay here with me, Congressman. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Fortunately, you are stuck with me a little bit longer here, but we're going to welcome the general here, who you two have quite the history together, I understand.
I see another Air Force general out here, too.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, thank you so much for
If I say something
joining
wrong,
us
don't
today.
correct me, would you?
Or do. That could be entertaining for all of us. All right, well, let's really dive in here, and we're going to hit one of the big topics that's been in the news lately, which is the Ukraine war. Second, you were strong leaders of the National Security Emergency Package. Congressman, you were to support Ukraine with critical assistance. Why was this package so important? Not just for security assistance, but for the economic and humanitarian components. Rally our allies and enable Ukraine. So I'll repeat that for you if we need to later, but let's start with General Newton here about your perspectives on these developments.
Well, first off, it's a real pleasure to be with Bitts, call sign Bitts, dear friend, U.S. Representative from Nebraska, and delighted. Actually, delighted to be back home. I'm a 1974 graduate of Bellevue High School, which I got a little applause for you there, Congressman. My dad was commander at Offutt Air Force Base, and then I had the privilege to serve at U.S. Strategic Command as a major general or two-star general. So it's good to be back home, and certainly to be on the stage with you, Don. Ukraine it's a real struggle, not only certainly between Russia and Ukraine, but also even here in the United States and around the world. What we're seeing right now is a very, very high stakes move by Ukraine to literally invade Russia, as they mentioned, in the southern part of Russia right now. Latest, I just checked my sources about 35 minutes or so ago, and they're about 24 miles inside of Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, as we all know. It was the largest land invasion since World War II of any state against another state. And a couple days or so ago, when President Zelensky made the decision to move the Ukrainian armed forces and literally invade Russia, it's the first time Russia's been invaded since World War II. So let's put that into historical perspective. Very high stakes. I think a bottom line to get your question, what that all means is, first off, why did President Zelensky of Ukraine make that decision? Because they're really somewhat pinned down in what I call a war of attrition on the eastern side of Ukraine in the Donbass region, and then down in Croatia to the south. But first off, I think to boost morale inside of Ukraine, we're now in the third year. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed on both sides of the border. Secondly, it has significantly put Putin on the defense. And that is not playing well, certainly in Russia, in my view, but also on the world stage. And so no longer do you find Putin necessarily just trying to go offensive, albeit a war of attrition, but now having to back on his heels in the defensive position. The other aspect of this I think is very important, and that is I think what Ukraine, or certainly Prime Minister or President Zelensky is doing, is just to remind the free world and to keep Ukraine on the radar, to make sure and to maintain support for Ukraine. I strongly support us, granted billions of dollars and so forth in support of Ukraine and the international support we've garnered. I think it's critical that Ukraine is, however we define victory here, and we can have that conversation later. Ukraine cannot lose, because that only has impact in Europe, and it also has impact with President Xi in China, Taiwan, China, North Korea, and elsewhere, and certainly what we're seeing in Iran via Israel. So long story short, that's the current state of play. I still think, however, my final point is that the move into Ukraine, or disregard into Russia, I believe what President Zelensky is trying to do is also perhaps set the stage for negotiations, which we could see in 2025. But we're still a long way off on that. And so, again, that's just the tip of the iceberg, my first thoughts.
Well, thank you, General. And so you kind of laid out that broader picture. So, Congressman, looking at this from the national security package, emergency package I mentioned earlier, could you share a little bit about that?
Will do. I knew General Newton when I was a captain. He was a lieutenant colonel. We deployed together to Egypt. Our all his captains would lounge around, and we'd see him jogging around the island in this little island in Cairo. And I said, that man's dedicated. But I also got to know him very well. One of the most decent, gracious leaders we had in the Air Force, and it was fun to see him as a 3-star. And so I'm a real fan. I love General Newton. And, but I want to say that up front. It's in our national security interest that Ukraine remain independent. Some people don't get it. I don't know why they don't get it. It's pretty clear to me that if Ukraine falls, our world is a more dangerous place, and we're going to be spending more money to have to worry about bolstering up NATO and other allies on the perimeter with Russia there. I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm an Eisenhower Republican in this regard. We stand up to bullies. And we don't have our troops there. And a lot of people keep making it sound like we have our troops there. We do not. Right? We have some folks doing accounting of the weapons so that we know how things are being spent and where it's being distributed. And we're doing a lot of that to address some of the critics of helping out Ukraine. But if Ukraine falls, I will guarantee you that Moldova will be taken next. You can take that to the bank. And I'm on the Baltic Security Chair, so I go to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia periodically. They have 50 years of occupation history. Every family knows someone that was shot or sent to Siberia. They are convinced they are next. I don't know that they would be because they are part of NATO, but that fear is real. It's palpable. You can feel it when you're there. So what we were giving to Ukraine is about 5% of our defense budget when you put it together. And it's had tremendous impact. Without our weapons, Ukraine would have fallen. There's no doubt about it. We have helped Ukraine beat them to the standstill out in the eastern part of Ukraine. And I think one of the concerns I've had is when we knew the invasion was about to occur, we publicly stated that we thought Ukraine would fall in 2 weeks. Put yourself in Putin's shoes. America says they're going to fall they're going to fall in 2 or 3 weeks. I think we sort of inspired them at that part, and it was right after Afghanistan too. So we had that going on as well. And because of that, we didn't send Ukraine the weapons they needed because we thought they were going to fall fast. So I would just share with you, part of our policy has been way too slow. We're dragging our feet. Now that we're giving them ATACMS, we're giving them anti-shipping missiles, we're putting a lot of restrictions on it. Why? Let's help them deliver defeat. So this war will end when Russia's will is broken. It's right out of Clausewitz. War is a battle of willpower, right? And you're gonna have to break their will. And this invasion in Kursk, which was, by the way, in 1943, the greatest tank battle ever fought between the Germans and the Russians in the same area. But this battle of Kursk is, I believe, it's part of trying to break Russia's will. At some point, they gotta stop. They've already lost between 300 and 400,000 Russians. Right now, they're losing territory. The Ukrainians have lost 70,000 killed. And so, but they can't, and to General Newton's point, Ukraine cannot keep doing this forever. So they're looking to find a way to move they gotta take some aggressive action just to get Russia to say, okay, we gotta come up, they gotta move them to want to negotiate. That's what this really is about, and breaking their will. So we did $61 billion. I will tell you, EU has matched it or surpassed it. There's a rumor or propaganda going around that we're doing this and the EU's not doing their part. EU has surpassed what we've put in. And it's going to be a team effort. If Russia wins this, our world's more dangerous and we're going to be spending more money.
I noticed a lot of head nodding as you were talking, so clearly there's a lot of agreement here. And so let's kind of zoom out here a bit, talk a little bit of the broader national security interest, because top military leaders and veterans are really some of the first to call for investments in diplomacy and development programs because it keeps our service members out of harm's way. And over recent years, I know we at USGLC have heard testimony from leading military voices across the combatant commands about the importance of remaining engaged across the globe. General C.Q. Brown Jr., the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, said at our Global Impact Forum this past year that we cannot do all we do as a military by ourselves, that the value of the military's partnerships with the interagency alliances and partners is so important. So drawing on your experiences, why are American development our diplomats and civilian international affairs agencies, such a critical partner for our military. And we'll go to you first, General Newton, that protects our nation about global threats that we face today.
You bet. It's an extraordinarily relevant question and discussion that we need to have, not only in the political square, but throughout the country. Jim Mattis, retired Army or Marine 4-star, former commander of U.S. Central Command and a former Secretary of Defense, and I'm going to paraphrase his words here, but said, you know, if we don't fully fund our international affairs budget, I'm just going to need more bullets. And think about that. Our son-in-law, Robert, Air Force Special Operations Major, came home recently on his 7th combat deployment. Our TR did back-to-back in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our men and women who are serving our nation in uniform are extraordinary. We have the best and brightest, all 2 million. Our active duty, our guard, and our reserve are extraordinary. But the military instrument of power is not the only instrument of power that needs to be employed every time. And what General Brown was, Colonel Brown back in the day, was dramatic and so forth. And agriculture, I think, was a great point you made earlier with regard to being part of our national security concern, but it's also part of our national security toolkit. I've been recently, through the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, went to Africa and saw where impacts on the African continent, where in this case U.S. Africa Command, the combatant command responsible for that region, or U.S. Special Operations Command, spends a lot of time in that part of the world, cannot be everywhere. And so where we are now flourishing, if you will, in some parts of Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, with trying to eradicate AIDS, trying to eradicate malaria and things along those lines, carry a long weight in terms of U.S. national security capabilities. It also means it's where our TRs and our Robbies don't have to go back again. And so I'm a huge believer in that. And again, I'm a bomber pilot by trade, but nonetheless, during my career, but also certainly now that I'm in the private sector, I see that firmly as an absolute important U.S. national security tool, our international affairs budget, in order to make sure that our world is free, but also U.S. national security interests are advanced. Not necessarily vis-a-vis a military aspect of that, but certainly this very, very important national security tool. Don?
Congressman, any thoughts on that from your end?
A little bit, but first, CQ Brown, we were colonels together, then one-stars together, and I was chairman. Dave Alvin, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I went to Air Command and Staff College with him. We were majors together, and then we were colonels and one-stars together. So he made 3 stars. I'm just,
You're just a congressman.
I peaked out at 1 star.
You're peeking out now.
You know, the economy of the United States is about $24 trillion. China is a little bit behind us. And they just revised the estimates of what China is spending on their budget for defense. They greatly underestimated it for a long time. So in other words, they're spending just a little under what we're spending. And they just focus on their coastal area right there in China. We're worldwide. So you have a country that's has an economy nearing ours, spending roughly what we are. Then we have Russia that's looking at how to weaken us wherever they can find a chink in our armor. They're going to try to put that knife in there. They do not like us. We are an impediment to what they want. They want a right, or a might makes right world where they can just bully their neighbors. You got North Korea, unstable. Iran, who wants to be the regional hegemon in the Middle East, a Persian empire, or I'd say a Shia empire. And that's why they have the Houthis as proxies, the Hezbollah and Hamas. Why do I say that? America can't fight all of that on our own. We don't have the economic wherewithal or the ability or the manpower to counter all these threats. So therefore, we have to have a strong State Department to build alliances. We need a Japan in our corner for Asia. With their population and economy, they're difference makers to counter China. We need to have a good alliance with Australia. We have forces flying out of there all the time right now. We need to do more with Philippines. Hopefully someday India will be more in our orbit, and that would be a game changer when it comes to China, countering China. We need a strong NATO. a NATO that's putting in 2% GDP. And by the way, I think you're telling me it's 22 countries today out of NATO are doing 2% plus. The Baltic countries have crossed 3% of their GDP for military. They're going to outspend us per GDP here soon because they see the threat. But we need a strong NATO. And then we look in the Middle East. We need countries that can help us stand up to Iran. It's going to take a State Department and foreign policy to put the free nations together on one team, working together to push back on these nations that don't share our values at all. And I'll give you one good anecdote how this works to our advantage. When I was in Iraq, I worked for Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus. Ambassador Crocker, one of the famous ambassadors of all time. He was my professor at National War College, so I love the guy. But I was working with the British there, and I was in a meeting one time, and the American philosophy in Iraq is kill the bad guys. That's how we thought. We're going to kill them all, kill all the bad guys. One day, this British guy with General Petraeus, everybody in the room, goes, you know, there may be some bad guys that you can get in your court and turn them. So why don't you determine who can you turn and make your ally, and who you can maybe isolate, and who you really have to kill. And we're all the Americans like, so you see that slower, right? But that became the beginning of the Sunni awakening, when we were able to get the Sunni tribal chiefs to turn on Al-Qaeda and kill the bad guys themselves. But we wouldn't have got, that took British influence to change our strategy in Iraq. It led to the Sunni awakening. And I just pointed out that we think a certain way. A lot of our war power thinking goes back to the Civil War, right? That's our culture. And it's important to have these alliances because they will give you a new perspective and maybe something you haven't thought of. So I just want to throw that out there as an anecdote.
Can I follow up real quick? Because you raised an excellent point on alliances. And back to the international affairs budget and international affairs aspect of the United States. It's not just a State Department thing, but it's a national security thing. Where we are able to establish partnerships, it could be one-on-one, it could be one on multiple partners and so forth. It enables America to lead. If we don't have American leadership in the world today, then you're going to end up having Iran with a nuclear weapon controlling the Mideast, and that's bad. Because then you're going to set off an arms race amongst Arab Gulf partners of the United States because they're going to be compelled to have a nuclear weapon and so forth. Again, the point is that our relationships, alliances and so forth is not just in the military realm, but it's very, very important, and I think key is really in the international affairs aspect of that. Certainly at the diplomatic level, but at the everyday aspect of how we do U.S. national security. And so I think that's where we get a huge bang for the buck of that, 1% budget, part of the nation's budget into international affairs. And so I think that's where we really need to make sure that, yes, we need to have the world's greatest, and we do, the United States military, absolutely. We can break down any door, we can find fixed target, kill any target we can find. But the point is really where the day in and day out U.S. leadership resides in international affairs.
Well, I promised y'all that I'd come back to you for more questions, so I hope your arms are all warmed up now so we can get a few questions from the audience here. Again, Emily and Sarah are walking around with microphones. Just raise your hand if you have a question. There we go. Just say your name, your organization, and your questions so we can get as many as possible.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lorenz. I'm a political scientist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So I'm actually a Congress scholar by trade. I study why some members of Congress are really good at passing bills. So Representative Bacon, as I think you know, is very, very good at that. But I've started thinking more about the role of Congress in the foreign policy of the United States. And so if you're comfortable with it, for both panelists, I'd really appreciate your perspective on a research question that I've been starting to think about now. The last panel ended with the discussion of the importance of bipartisanship. And I'm curious, how does partisanship here at home and in Congress affect our ability to make credible promises to allies and potential treaty partners, and even to our adversaries? And I'd just be interested in any thoughts you have about that. Thank you.
If I heard the question right, it's how does partisanship affect working with allies? got that about right. Well, I think it hurts us. I'll give you an example. We were all supporting Ukraine after the invasion. And we were probably on my side of the aisle picking at President Biden for not doing enough to help out Ukraine faster. Then when I saw the day that President Biden get up and say, we're going to help out Ukraine, I think 20 or 30% of the folks on my side said, well, no, we don't want to do that anymore. And it's strictly a partisanship. It's whatever the other guy's for, I'm going to be against. And I don't think we should think that way. We're in this post-truth culture, I've been reading books on this, that it's more important to beat the other guy than to do the right thing. And we got to be about doing the right thing. And sometimes we can agree. How can we not see that what Russia is doing is terrible? They're bombing cities, they're kidnapping kids, they're devastating villages they've taken over. It's clear evil. But to me, Russia's clear. The Hamas attack on Israel was as evil as could be, with the 1,200 people that were murdered there. And we should be very clear, Iran is behind all of this. So they're the enemy behind all the smoke right there going on. But I said enough, I'll yield.
From a military leader's perspective, when you're in a room with adversaries, when I was serving on my first term, the Joint Chiefs, I did Russian arms control. But whenever you go into a room, either with adversaries or with friends and allies or near friends, one thing you want to have behind you is the fact that you have a united front, certainly back in Washington, D.C. Now, the epicenter of the world is not necessarily Washington, D.C., but I mean in terms of our politics and our political structure. Today, and you made it very clear, that overlap, we're now separate and apart, and I think that actually hurts national security. And as a senior military leader, or as in our uniformed military, you don't want us getting into domestic politics. But the point is the fact that you walk into those rooms that I have, certainly in the international arena, and you have the backing of a United States. It's United States. It's not the Democrats or the Republicans. It's the United States. That hurts us. And it's almost as if it puts one arm behind our back. Final point is, I testified on the Hill, bless your heart, in the House Armed Services Committee. I never got to testify in front of you, but the House Armed Services Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, and the Probes Committees. And my job was to provide the best military advice to members of Congress, and not necessarily to a particular party and so forth. Sometimes that best military advice went against the grain of who was currently the President of the United States. That's okay. I also want our adversaries and our friends to understand that your U.S. military, especially your U.S. senior military leaders, are indeed also providing that best military advice versus a partisan advice. We have nowhere, I think, in our current state of affairs right now is we should not have any of that be part of the best military advice, and therefore how we execute our national security.
Maybe add two things.
Sure, go right ahead.
So the Armed Services Committee is one of the most bipartisan committees, and it is a blessing to be on that. I would not want to be in the Oversight Committee or Judiciary. I mean, they're throwing stuff at each other, right? So ridiculous. But at least, I agree with the Democrats on the Armed Services Committee on about 95% of the things we work on. And where we have disagreements, it doesn't really break down on party lines. It's more just, good people can disagree, right? So I wanted to put that out there. And I would just say one of the problems we have with partisanship and dealing with foreign policy or anything, our party leaders, their main goal is to take power, right? Their main goal is to have control of the House or take control of the House or grow our majority, take control of the Senate, or win the presidency. There are a lot of our party leaders, I want to throw them all under the bus, but the majority, that is their mission. People like us, we're trying, okay, we got to make decisions that work for our country. But if you make a move to try to figure out how to work with this guy, you will get feedback from the leadership saying, hey, you're not helping out the party here. We need you to be with the party. And infrastructure is an example for me. I saw it as a clear thing that our country needed, but it became a partisan vote because it was perceived it was going to help the Democrats out, right? And we like infrastructure in Nebraska, for starters. But anyway, the party leadership is part of the problem. And their incentive is not to always necessarily get the best bill passed. It is to beat the other guy.
Especially in an election year.
Yes.
So
which is every 2 years.
Right. Really, you have about a 1 month period of time where you can legislate, I think, before we go back into the campaign mode. We're running short on time here, so if you have any other questions, write them down or send us an email. We'll make sure we get them to the right folks. But I want to go to our closing question here so we can make sure we get you out on time, keep your staff happy. And so really, this is a question we ask all across the country. We asked it earlier, which is, what's it worth? Because during the past several years, we've been learning just how global America's heartland is, and what happens globally matters locally here at home in places like Nebraska. So in your view, in just a few words, and we'll go to General Newton first, help us wrap up today's conversation. What's it worth to the heartland for America to invest in things like diplomacy and development and global food security, and ultimately for America to lead on the global stage? So General Newton first, and we'll let Congressman close.
The heartland is to me, of course, I'm emotionally attached to the heartland, as I mentioned to you from my family background. But if you think about the heartland, the first thing I think about is national security, and the first thing I think about there is Offutt Air Force Base. My dad commanded there, and Representative Bacon commanded there as well. And he would also tell you, I think you told me also, is that the sun never sets on the 55th wing. It's a global national security capability. It's not just an Air Force installation. It's not just an Air Force mission. It's not necessarily just a Department of Defense mission. It is a U.S. national mission. It is really a rare jewel, I think, in our U.S. national security. Second point is the fact that not only in terms of the national security, the Department of Defense mission aspect of that, but as we've talked about, production of foods, agriculture, the Center of Excellence you reminded me of with cyber, and also with bio. That is absolutely critical. And I'm not just being polite, because I'm back in the heartland. It is absolutely critical that we support these capabilities, because not only do they have an impact on the heartland, but the heartland's having an impact on U.S. national security. And the fact that the United States is enabled to lead because of what the heartland is providing.
Congressman.
It was an honor of a lifetime to be the 55th Wing Commander. It was the largest wing in the continental U.S., 7 different type aircraft when I was there, all different. And when I was there, I went back 20 years, we'd flown every single day somewhere. So it's a beast of a wing, and I loved it. I could have done it until I was 80, 90, but Air Force won't let me do it. Right? So to answer the question, we live in the greatest country in the world. I love studying our history, how we started off in 1776, our Constitution kicked in in 1789, and what we become after World War II. We're the economic powerhouse, our free market system, we've got to protect it. We got the freedoms that have defined the world. Everybody looks at us and we were that bright light. That's what we're going to be like in our country. And we got to protect it. And it can't just be military. Military, we tend to rely on it, but we got to use all of our instruments of power, starting with diplomatic, information, military, economic. We have to protect all of that. And the world needs us. They don't need us to be an arrogant leader. They need us to be humble leaders. But we're the quarterback on that team. And quarterbacks need receivers. They need running backs and blockers. So we're going to have to build that team around for freedom and our values. And we need all of the above to make that happen.
Well, thank you, General Newton. Thank you to the Congressman. Round of applause while I welcome Rose Leonard to the stage here to close us out today.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your patience for just a couple more minutes. We're going to wrap things up today. We've covered a whole heck of a lot of ground. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Congressman Don Bacon for his leadership on Capitol Hill and for all the speakers for joining us here today, providing their insights on why American leadership is so important in the world. Thank you also to Cargill for serving as our Heartland Chair, and to our local partners who made this event happen. I really encourage you to check out the amazing work they do across the Heartland and around the world. Some of them are even in the hallway for our exposition. Lastly, thank you to our Nebraska Advisory Committee members, Veterans for Smart Power Initiative, and Farmers for Prosperity Network for joining us here today, and for all of you in this room and also joining us virtually. We couldn't host these events without your support. And if you're new to USGLC, I really encourage you to opt into messages from our coalition to hear about what we're doing across the Heartland and across the nation. If you have any questions at all, feel free to come up to me or my colleagues. We'll be floating around the room if you want to talk about how to get more engaged with USGLC. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to the Heartland is crucial. We appreciate your passion, your voices, and your engagement. Now, we want you to share what you've learned today with your network, your colleagues, friends, and family. Let today not be the last conversation you have on America's role in the world. Thank you for your support, as always. And for those of us in the room, we have a coffee and dessert reception in the hallway. And with that, that concludes this year's Heartland Summit. Thank you so much.